of our members, Mr. Costello and Ms. Armstrong. So I will go ahead and call to order the July 16th, 2024 meeting of the Design Review Committee. And I will open the floor. Our first item on the agenda tonight is election of officers. I will open the floor for a nomination for chair.
I will nominate Corey Gabbard for chair. So he's not here to get stuck with it.
That's how that goes.
A motion, do I have a second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then next we will have, if we can have a nomination for vice chair.
I will nominate Paul for vice chair.
All right, and a second?
Is he allowed to vote?
Yes. And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then our bylaws state that the secretary of the Design Review Committee must be a staff member. I am willing to serve, if we can just get a motion and a second for that.
I motion.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent.
I like that kind of
We can make it as well, so that's great.
The next item we have on the agenda is approval of minutes. If everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes, we do have two. We had a special meeting, a 5:15 meeting in December, and we also had our regular December 11th meeting. So we will need a motion and a vote on each one of the minutes.
Do you need separate motions or?
Together.
I motion that I will make motion that we will approve both of those meeting minutes.
Excellent.
So moved.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And we do have on the agenda this evening review of Design Review Committee bylaws. That's really only there if you all had an opportunity to take a look and have any suggested changes. We have recently updated them back in December, so staff had no changes to make.
I don't have a change.
We're fine.
Excellent. Then our first scheduled application is COA 2024-8, application by SP Real Estate Holdings LLC, requesting a certificate of approval, COA to amend COA 2023-11 related to design and parking exceptions for an automobile dealership on tax map number 593-2 FP7. The property is located at 12501 Broad Street Road on the south line of Broad Street Road at the Houston County border with Henrico County and within the Centerville Village Overlay District. The property is zoned B1 Business General with proffered conditions. The COA is required by County Zoning Ordinance Section 15435.
Good evening. This is Mr. Vice Chair, member. For the record, I am Ray Cash, Assistant Director of Community Development. I present the case for the applicant tonight. If you recently just read the minutes were pretty much this case. For that, there was two previous reviews of this case, and the previous case in October and December. The applicant was wonderful in working with us and from the committee's guidance for the previous review. What we're talking about tonight is an amendment related to that. What I'd like to do at the beginning of the meeting is kind of remind everyone what the committee does and sort of what the committee will consider. When we receive a certificate of approval, we review it based upon the overlay provisions of each of the entrance corridors or the village centers. All exterior walls have the same articulated harmonious materials, color, texture, and treatment. We look at the combination of things for a building. It could be design, line, dimension, mass, things here. They should conform to acceptable architectural principles for permanent buildings, reflecting the character of the corridor overlay district. We have several different areas, and so they have different characters for them. And also, any design that comes forward should be not designed to serve primarily as an advertisement. If you think about the little Pizza Huts with the big pizza, sort of the hat. For that, it should not be those for temporary or short-term architectural aesthetic acceptability, and that should be seen to constitute a reasonable detriment or to the attractiveness of the corridor. What the process is you're requested to consider applications that are appealed by the applicant or referred by staff. The DRC may approve or deny the application or approve the application with conditions that later staff would seek compliance through future plans. You could assist in resubmittal and recommend suggestions. We will require applicants to submit plans that reflect any changes, that or conditions that are imposed tonight. This last statement here is the one that really, guides what you're doing. In order to allow for reasonable expansion of existing structures and to allow flexibility in application design and development standards applicable to the overlay district, the design review committee may grant reasonable deviations from the design standards if the site's topography, configuration, or other unique circumstances prevent full compliance with the requirements. So again, the case before us tonight is in Centerville Village. It's right at the border of Goochland and Henrico County. This was zoned in 2022 with 2023, B1 with proffered conditions. Some of this affected the layout and design of the property. Portions of this application we do anticipate we'll be able to administratively review those, or they're based upon previous approvals that came before the committee. The proposed revisions before you really have modifications to a previous approval that came about in December. And those really relate to 4 categories: architecture, building materials, roof treatment, and parking. And in part for the parking and design, there is a landscaping element to that because that was part of the original elements approved with the design of the building, and also the parking lot. That was a consideration that came about in the way the condition and approval for architecture was, as well as parking lot. Again, this property is at the border of Henrico. If you notice this square that's in the center of the property, that actually is the county's booster station. So that area is not counted towards the site. That area previous approval we'll talk about was fenced. As you can see, it's B1. Surrounding properties, this is really originally part of the West Creek area. This is, but it's not really an industrial property. Across the street, you have a vacant parcel. You also have Val, Tommy's, and Wawa. So as I mentioned, there's a booster station on the site. The area is constrained by a floodplain. There's also a giant utility easement that runs down the center of it, and that's a utility easement that's important to both Goochland and Henrico. So you don't want anybody messing with that. This is the proposed layout here. You can notice there's a commercial and mixed development of residential and commercial along the frontage. It's located in Henrico County. This is the revised layout, and we'll go through those distinctions as we go forward. I will say that as we go through this, the renderings and the views and things that are in here are not put together by staff, although I may have marked them up some. These are put forward by the applicant. So the previous site layout that was designed, we had entrance that we all worked through site design and through this committee about the entrance to the site. Principal entrance up here. There's a stoplight that's down here at the sort of the end of the property. There was approvals related to the parking. We'll talk about that as we go through. And also here's the booster station property right here. So there will be a shared access that they'll be providing as well to our booster station. Principal element of the original design is this large area was a 3-story parking garage. Was part of that original proposal. Laid out the compass here because sometimes the images will twist a little bit. Primarily note that Broad Street Road is to the north of this property. West is back towards Goochland, and east is towards Henrico. This area, that's the dotted dashed lines here, that's the area that's changed and brought about changes that are proposed by the applicant. We'll talk about the results of those changes, its impact on the perimeter architecture, layout, and the like as I go forward. So the modification request. Part of this is to 15.44781, which really relates to the character of our property. It has certain requirements about what a building is supposed to be, and it should be matching traditional villages, in particular the villages in which it's located, in this case Centerville overlay, which talks about should have fixed roofs, limited heights, cupolas, columns, and smaller scaled windows. Should complement the character in terms of color, scale, and texture. It should have a unified appearance similar to buildings and colors on each side of the building. We have certain requirements in there that you should anticipate how it relates to the rest of the overlay and other buildings in the area. In terms of scale, color, and texture. These are things we worked out in the previous meetings with the applicant, and we'll just highlight them as we go through. Because the overlay, primarily it's brick, stone, or semi-kitchen siding. Most commonly in earth tones, brick, red, town, brown, or gray. Smaller material patterns, typically with smaller brick patterns that are there, and other architectural relief that breaks up building mass. There are approved materials that are listed in 15.4783. These materials on the left are what's listed within the overlay that should be used. The applicant did propose, and there were materials approved in the previous review related to use of concrete panels, glass other than as an accent material, metal panels, spray concrete veneers, just a small area of that, metal panels, flat roof with liner. Again, it's supposed to be pitch roofs, but there are examples of flat roofs within the village. And then originally the concrete on the parking deck. So this is the layout of the previous approval. The elevations were submitted and approved in the second go round. If you recall, the final December hearing, the applicant came forward with two different options. This is the option that was approved. Part of this, we labeled the materials. It's a flat roof with liner, which is one of the requests. Metal panels is really related to these accent materials. The area of glass, specifically for the overlays, just have glass really as an accent material. This was unique because it's additional glass for the area. The applicant worked with the committee to modify how much glass was in there. It is consistent today with what's approved. Additionally, elevated walls elements were put here to sort of shield the views of the cars from the adjacent property. Also, they changed the building form to make it look more like a building with the window elements, faux windows, shapes of that, to really keep it of a form that it's not really a parking deck, but it's actually a occupiable building. So again, the previous elevation, we also mentioned there was an overhang for the bay doors because they do oriented towards Broad Street Road, but that was approved previously by the committee with this element. Minimized accent in the area. This was modified over time through the reviews. As I mentioned, the scaled walls, flat roof with gray liner with a white parapet on the front element of the building, and elevated walls on the parking deck. So I really highlight these two areas in the red square because they're the ones that you're going to see changing architecturally from the building proposal. Again, the two red elements. This is really the eastern elevation facing towards Henrico, which had the extenuating features of accident features, windows, and the like. This is also the south elevation, which had the same, and again, was on the parking deck feature. That, with the removal of the parking deck, as we'll talk about, will change the south elevation. So really, the remaining portion of the buildings generally conform to what was previously approved. Materials that haven't received any changes or requests to change the materials from what's previously approved. What I've seen in the elevations, the same amount of glass that we worked out before. Really, it's buildings chopped off. The parking deck's gone. The reason I also included this, just a consideration. Now with the removal, there is no, this area doesn't have the light perimeter as the other area. This was formerly a transition to the parking deck on this back side of it here. But the only reason I bring it up is because that is part of the change of elevation, is that without the parking deck, the shape and form of the building and the south elevation has changed. The red square really is to highlight the notice that there's something missing. The parking deck is gone. This is now the south elevation, which is really, this portion of the building is facing towards the wetland and floodplain area that's to the south of the area. As we look again at the orientation of the building, you'll see that this is steered away from views of other properties here. So consideration of 15.44784, as I mentioned, 15.447, there's three elements of that were part of sort of the architecture review. This one again is about really to the pitched roof type design. This is the previous approval that did do that. The color scheme, as I'll mention again, was negotiated, worked out, was concerned originally with the original proposal. Nothing in here shows me that they're deviating from the previous colors of before, and to include the roof parapet as previously approved, has a white element on the top. Exterior design. Again, just to show the elevation, how this area is slightly different than the other, but mainly the parking deck started here and moved backwards. So the next element that was approved originally through the DRC approvals related to parking. Part of the provisions in the ordinance does require that you can't have more than a double row of parking along Broad Street Road. You have to distribute parking in all areas of the building, front, back, side. And also you can utilize low impact design practices for that. So part of the approvals that went through, we'll talk about as we get to the next stage, but the applicant does propose changes to the previously approved plan, which does require your review. The parking changes result primarily from the removal of the parking deck, and changes include additional plantings and fence proposals along the eastern perimeter, which borders the lake. This is the original, I've marked it all up. Part of this goes to base ordinance requirements, provisions that came forward during the zoning case, and the provisions related to your approval. So the green area, again, it exceeded the double row permitted, and that's in front of the building and to the side. There was a limitation in the zoning case that basically said you could not display inventory within 100 feet there. There was also a standard buffer condition we have along this front here. And so there were additional plantings that we worked out through the review. There's also, through this review also will show they actually did larger more plantings in these islands. The red area here was permitted front display through the board of the supervisor's approval. 6 spaces, 6 other spaces are up there as well, with 6 for display. Original, there was no parking along the eastern side of the site, and we had the original parking in the yellow box, parking bag. So it was the original configuration, part of the conditions that came forward. There was actually some elevated plantings that we talked about. It would come forward in the landscape plan, and we've seen those. There's also low walls, including in the buffer. Part of that was to screen the bay doors, but also soften the appearance of the double row of additional parking along the frontage. There were additional plantings within these islands here. That was part of the review approval from the committee. We addressed how this area here is screened of the booster station. There is a fenced area for this and screening for that. Again, on this edge, we also had extended or heightened walls from that. Part of that was design elements that we were concerned about the view of the building or the form of the building. The other part was there was concern at the time from Henrico County regarding the appearance from the residential units or views of the residential through there. So the applicant did include elevated walls. As well as that, there's also a PVC fence that went along the exterior boundary of the site here. Let's see. So part of this, the consideration is that we have received a letter of concern from Henrico about views into the property. Previously, those elements were there of concern for that. Part of the restrictions related to really how the site needed to operate with the parking garage that was there previously. So these are the previous approval views that came forward. Here is basically looking from, I guess, where we were talking the southeast into the site, and here is looking more from into it from the northeast of the site. If you notice, the PVC fence goes along the boundary of the property, and both of the instances, as you can see, you have the architectural elements here. You know, I can't say the southern elevation has no view, but it is a slightly but distorted view of the rear of the building. So the proposal is again to remove the parking deck. So this area here in yellow is really the focus of this area here. Here's increased site parking area, now ground level parking that was previously within the deck. There's a revised dumpster location. Previously it was generally up about the end of the building here. We're okay with that revision as long as it still meets the same screening provisions that we saw before that were approved, and I don't doubt that they will. 3 additional islands along this edge here are proposed. Circled just one in blue, but they also, each of these islands will have 2 large deciduous trees in there. Current landscape proposal, those would be Zelkovas. Familiar with Zelkovas, they're really upside down bases, you know, the base form rather. There is a change in the fencing here. There was PVC fence all along the perimeter here. Now the proposal is this portion to be in red is to really be 6 foot tall PVC white fence along this edge, and then the change has been to make this an aluminum fence along the southern, eastern boundary here for this portion. You can see really what the arrows talk about the transition. I'll just mark this as best I can in the image. So staff's comments is really we anticipate and will require a new lighting plan, a new landscape plan, and new POD through administrative review for these. There was concern previously for lighting on the site when it was up on the parking deck. The applicant did have some conditioned lighting plans with that and worked with us. We will anticipate reviewing that again through this process about make sure the lights conform with that, and my conversation with the applicant, they can verify those. So they understand the concern previously about the lighting and anticipate carrying it forward in this administrative review. And the other is concerned with transition along the eastern property line fence, the fence type change. There was received a letter of concern from Henrico County, was sent to those people concerned, hopefully they've seen it. The requires that they were concerned about views into the use from the residential portion of the property in Henrico County. They considered in their statement PVC fence helpful, but they felt there should be buffer along the eastern perimeter for this. Again, so now we're looking at what the previous approval views were here. You know, PVC fence all the way down. This is the proposed change to views. The applicant, there's a couple of different ones we have in the application if they need to see those. PVC fence along this portion, you see the drop down where it goes into an aluminum style fence. And this really the property starts to drop a little bit here, part of a little bit of a wall there underneath it. The metal fence would be up on the top. I would note that this is the commercial portion of the property that's under development in Henrico County. This is an applicant's depiction of the views. If I'm right, I believe it's sort of looking this way into the site up here, probably this location. They can correct me if I'm wrong. Again, the PVC fence, and as you can see in these views, the aluminum fence along this frontage. So really, what are we here for? A request is, since, as I mentioned, there are changes from the previous approval for those. There were considerations of the exceptions that were granted previously based upon what the site concepts were then, where the elements were of the architecture of the building, other types of actions on the site. Specifically, you're looking to provisions to that section 15.4781(3) and 4. That's really the building itself, architecture, building materials, roof treatment. To 15.447(b)(3) really relates to, and I included as a parking, but recognize that part of that was all the consideration of site layout and related landscape transition, because those were all elements that tied into the conditions in the original reasoning and approval from the, design review committee. So I felt it was appropriate, when you consider these changes, you take into consideration, as the ordinance says, generally the entire site, and these are special circumstances that make it unique, transitions, topography and variety. So again, for that is the completion of my presentation. Do you have any questions for me? Would you like to go back? I didn't change my last slide, sorry about that.
Was the original fencing approved by you?
So the
I
original,
don't recall that we
yeah,
kept that.
so the original PVC fencing was part of the original approval. Part of that is in the original design for the site. Because of the building elements, its lengths, its the extent of what the building extended on the property and the tightness of this transition around here. We did give some administrative relief to the required buffer that's there, and through that process. The PVC fence was part of that element to screen the area as best you could. Part of it did extend further up here, and that was part of the reasons of the property as well.
So with that staff approval?
That was approved through the DRC. The fences, yeah, the PVC fence. That was part of the original.
That's what you were looking for, right?
The approval.
Was that the January approval or the one prior?
That was the one that was at the DRC hearing. Well, it was approved at the October hearing, the transition, but it was subject to the other changes that occurred at this point. So eventually it all became the final package. I will mention, and this is something I need to clarify with the applicant while we're here. The aluminum fence that's proposed, I didn't see an element of it in there, but is it similar to the one we already approved on the other thing? So
It's
the same-
identical to, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Except the height will be smaller for this portion.
Correct.
So I can pull it up for you if you recall. It's basically an aluminum fence that looks more like a wrought iron fence, black. So more ornamental. That was what was approved around the booster station. I believe the booster station was like 8 feet tall. For this, we're talking a varying height, 3.
Go from 6 down to 3.
6 down to 3. So it would start at 6 here down. And I do apologize for that. That was an element that wasn't clear on this presentation today.
That's all good. Thank you.
The south elevation is a change that we have to approve, right?
So part of this is the south elevation is what you have to approve. As the building itself in shape and form has changed for use, does that change any of the previous relief or considerations for the architecture? Staff's not making any recommendations in that direction for you. The other is the property is relation now with the change in building. We thought it was appropriate that you see the change in parking and layout because there was so much discussion in the original approval.
There was.
Would you like us to ask?
Do a further discussion? I don't mind.
Comment, but go ahead.
So this is like my first meeting, so just make sure I understand.
Mhm.
The recap is very helpful. So my takeaway is it fair to really say that either previously approved by the DRC or through administrative relief today, all the things relating to building design, glass, concrete liners, metal panels, roof parapets, parking, these are all basically some form of exceptions already granted to the ordinances, whether they be the overlay district or these other reference numbers that you indicated in this.
Correct.
So there's been a lot of discussion, and it looks like a lot of, wiggle room, if you will, that's been provided to facilitate what's been happening so far.
Right, yeah. Just to go back over, a lot of discussion and concern originally was, say, white in the building versus now the tenants, that was worked out with the applicant, they were responsive with this and that. I've really focused a lot on the elements along the parking deck. There were other considerations, again, the debate over orientation, The glass was also a consideration. A lot of that actually was a reduction in the original proposal for glass.
Right.
There is one other use in the area that has the glass, that's the Audi dealership, which had similar restrictions about reduction in glass. So there, you know, a lot of this changed over time. Originally, this was more all wires and you know, they basically curved the element, you know, stops with the color changes. So a lot of this was all previous type things, being that it was such a part of a previous discussion with now changing elevation was that you should come back and see it again.
Okay, that's all. The other thing, you know, I just happened to walk the property yesterday. I wanted to kind of just see what it was like and get a feel of the elevations. The one thing I noticed, and I couldn't tell from all the packets, where the townhouses are on the Enrico side, directly across from the townhouses, it drops off pretty considerably. I mean, I'm thinking at the far end of that, it's probably
Use that as a-
10 more feet.
Back part more.
And as it grades up towards Broad Street, it does flatten out, but then it actually becomes higher as you get to Broad Street. And so I'm trying to think, this looks like a nice flat lot, but in reality, it's not flat at all.
Right.
And there's a little stream, and I noticed you know some floodplain, so how did staff consider the topography when we're thinking about, I know when we had the parking garage, it almost took care of that.
Right.
Now with what's being proposed, in many ways, you're gonna be looking down on Henrico into where the parking lot is being proposed. So you think about a 6-foot fence, that's not even gonna come up to the top of the, parking area for these townhouses.
That's part of the consideration that's before you for that. Staff still, you know, felt like administratively, we had previously approved the buffer,
Yeah, that
actually
was part
because
of
of the site.
And that's part of the zoning. So
Right, that we shared with the board for that. To compensate for those elements, there was a discussion, with them to find a way to add additional canopy as best we can into this area. Recognizing that's only a certain time of year, solution for that. You know, the applicant, has tried to consider what the views are and that they have different ones. I could always show you through the proposal, and they have certain ones they want to point out that could for that. And so, yes, are we doing a full screening of the parking area? I know this is something that really is sort of to minimize or soften the elements that moves into that. So what's shown is really the anticipated type of concept for the applicant as well, is to have these double islands with 2 large trees in there with upper growing canopy. You know, we can always work out with the project people, the developer, the landscaper, you know, potentially options would be, and I think we talked about this, maybe more mature trees to start to make sure that they're sort of getting something in there quicker. Also, additional landscaping on these islands here. If you look at sort of their concept plan as well as they would give the larger trees here, and then the double trees here. So at least fence is sort of covers the views for this first element, and then the hope was as you go forward with here, you have it softening or diminished with the canopy of the large deciduous trees.
Just add a couple other,
Yeah,
things to
right.
that, so, Dave Cody, architect, we walked the property and kind of did what you did as well, just really looking at this, and I think the one thing that got us really excited, or at least it got me really excited, was, I know there was other excitement, there's a couple really big trees that are on that current property edge buffer, and so we were trying really hard to keep those really tall trees as part of this development. We hired an arborist to come out and look at these. There's 2 that we saw, but they identified 3. And they gave us a report and basically said you can't keep these trees, the roots are messed up. And there was a forest around that at some point in time, so if you take down the forest on both sides, and then it could be structurally, it's taking wind loads, it hasn't really hurt that. and I was, personally, I was like, oh man, I put it on here, it's like, I wanna keep these trees, so I called him, and he's like, hey, I'm in the business of keeping trees, but these can't stay. So what that did for us is it allowed us to have more flexibility with this buffer and where those islands and pockets of trees are, because previously it was framing these couple trees that were existing. So we strategically placed them on our property side in a manner that would mask as much of the parking deck and building from the residential use. The other thing we learned when we did that was there's 10 or 15 of these other trees on the willow oak trees that have been planted on the neighbor's property. And we're showing those in these renderings as well. So right where all that red arrow that says PVC fence, there's already a lot of trees that are on their side as well, which helps. I mean, that's not obviously part of what we're doing, but it is.
We played off that, yeah, we played off that to help with the shading as well with their trees. To make sure there's continuous shading, you know, for the next 10 years over that area looking over through there.
So Ray, I don't mean to interrupt staff's presentation.
I think if we're at question time, if you're okay, we'll let the applicants decision.
I'd like to introduce everybody and just make some general comments before we get into the weeds of it, but,
Or the trees.
right, yeah, trees first. and then
We get into
weeds, right?
weeds, we're
Yeah.
really.
That's right. My name's Mike Rothermel, I'm an attorney with the law firm Spots Payne. So it's been my privilege to represent Joey for the last couple of years. This, we were talking at dinner. I've been involved with it for 2 years. We met with Jamie back in 2022 to get this process started. But Joey reminded us that he's been involved since 2019 or 2020. You know, with Honda becoming the winning the point to locate this dealership here. So it's been a long process. And I'm just going to make my way around the table here, introducing everybody in their roles, because Joey's really put together a really good team. But you know, a lot of times I'm in here on behalf of the developer who develops a site and then is out of here. Joey's going to be a long-time corporate citizen of the county, and so he's, you know, he's come down here, you know, numerous times, and we've had a lot of meetings. We, you know, when Honda changed its requirements as far as dealer inventory, which is what precipitated this change, and allowed Joey to move forward without the parking deck, which, by the way, was the biggest source of complaint that we got from those folks. You know, we came back in, we met with Jamie and Ray, as well as the deputy county administrator, to get their feedback on what they wanted to see, what their concerns were, you know, the finer points of design and landscaping. And so as I move around the room here, I'm just going to sort of tell you what everybody's done. Andrew Bowman is with Silver Core, local civil engineering firm. Andrew has put the civil plans together. He's also been primarily in charge of the landscaping. And they've put a lot of thought into the landscaping. Prior to the last DRC meeting, we focused mostly, obviously, on the frontage back in October and December of last year, so that it was attractive from Broad Street. And you know, the county was very clear at the beginning that this is the gateway into Goochland, and they wanted the site to be nice. And so they put a lot of landscaping in the front, walls, trees, a lot of thought went into that. You know, Andrew worked with the county and going back and forth on that. He and these guys are all going to talk about whatever you want them to talk about as far as each of these elements that have changed since you all approved it in December. But Dave started referencing it. You know, they've met with an arborist. They really, when you talk about the view from the east and the townhouses in Henrico, I think this is such a better view shed or product than they had with the big parking deck. And when I think about some of the other, you know, nearby Henrico developments, when you think of Westborough Village, when you think of Greengate, you know, this one's, the Stanley Martin development's pretty similar in that you've got sort of multi-story townhome style residential right on top of commercial and big parking areas. and if you look at Greengate, you know, there's huge parking lots right in front of the townhouse. So we were a little caught off guard by the complaints or concerns with this site. But nonetheless, these guys did a really nice job of taking inventory on the Henrico side, seeing what's there now, locating the additional islands and trees along that eastern side, both on the very edge as well as sort of on the other side of the drive aisle to offset, so that the views from the Henrico side, you know, once you sort of get over that 6-foot fence, and I think Mr. Costello, you asked the question about that 6-foot fence is really not going to do anything, but I think Bill will say that's going to be sort of on the top sort of level with the adjoining parking of the townhomes. So it will provide quite a bit of screening when you're on ground level on the Henrico side. But Andrew can answer all the questions about the civil plans and the landscaping, and these guys have been heavily involved as well. Bill Kimple is with Rainier Construction. Bill, and I'll say this both for him and Dave Caldy is with Archall, he's the architect on the project. These guys have had the unenviable task of not only addressing all the requirements that Goochland has, all of which are, you know, reasonable, and we understand where the county's coming from, wanting to have this just a top-notch development. But Honda has its own requirements, right? And so it's been a balance between taking everything that the feedback we've got from the county and going back to Honda and saying this is what we need to do and getting pushback there and bouncing back and forth. And so Dave and Bill both have a lot of experience working with the auto dealers, including Honda, so they've done a really nice job of sort of balancing everybody's wish list in putting this all together. So, you know, this is a really good team. I thought what might be most helpful, I think probably Dave is best to sort of walk through the changes. You know, for instance, the fence, I think the change for the fence was precipitated just more from an aesthetic point of view. You know, you've got the aluminum fencing on the west side of the building for the pump station, which I think is what the county wanted. So when you're looking at the site from the front, you see sort of the aluminum, the black aluminum on both sides. But you know, I think that we view this as all positive changes, and I think I started referencing it. You know, the change was brought about by Honda post-COVID, and I don't know if it's true of other dealers as well.
I think most manufacturers realize we don't need to have sea of cars to sell cars, right? And COVID really taught us that here, you know, we just need a small supply of cars, and as vehicles come in, they're gonna be sold beforehand and then presented to the customer.
Right. So that brought about the change, the sort of decreased requirement on the dealer, on the manufacturer's part, which we viewed as just a positive all around, because overwhelmingly the complaints were this big parking structure. And I think, Mr. Costello, we recall when you were in December and your concern was coming off 288. You know, people would see that big parking deck and the lights on top. So we, you know, we're delighted that we don't need to build that right now. It is. So I thought what would be most helpful is to have Dave sort of walk through and just explain the changes, the elevations, the fencing, the landscaping, and then to the extent there are any questions, we've got all the experts here to answer.
Thanks. Yeah. Tell me which one to look at, or?
I stay here, this shows most of it. There is one other image that's, we took of, from the parking lot of the neighboring property that's in the original packet, which I didn't see in this, but. Yeah, the white and blue.
You see it, yell at me.
Right somewhere.
These are their pictures, and then.
That's the page I wanted to talk about, the one up above that. So the photographs. So, we'll come back to this one in a minute. so this one's not relevant quite, I just wanted to get it teed up.
Okay.
So if you can go back to the,
We just, as a placeholder, we could have a page number that is, because that's kind of the, I want to come back to this at some point. Whatever page this is.
I think this has the things that
Do you wanna go back?
Here we go. This is page,
That's 6, right?
that's page 10. So this is page 10. Okay. What would you like to go back to?
go back to the other tab that you have open.
What, the presentation?
Presentation.
Yeah, the presentation, there you go. Okay. And then go, this is, there you go, go forward a couple more, are we at the beginning again? There you go,
This is
that's fine, that's good. So, really the primary changes is that I don't wanna recap everything, right, except we did a good job of explaining what all the primary changes were. On the building, the primary thing again is the removal of the parking structure. So the remaining chunk of the building is essentially the same footprint that it was originally. So the change that is different at this point is the south elevation, which you don't see in this particular view. So that's one thing we do need to talk about because it has changed what was previously discussed, but the rest of the building is all essentially identical. There's no other changes that were done anywhere else. When we started having this conversation about the removal of the parking structure, honestly, we all felt like, oh, this is gonna be really easy, but this is the thing that everybody really had a lot of comments on.
We spent a lot of effort on
We spent a lot of time on it. You know?
Yeah, it was, it's really.
There was a lot of effort that went into that thing, and there was a lot of conversation on it, like, okay, well, this should be very easy, like, when we come back in and show everybody, we're taking away the thing that seemed to have the most, attention to it. But in our conversations, what we did do is really focus on that buffer between the parking, area and the neighborhood. So there is a different level, we've already kind of hit on it already with trees, and Andrew can talk about the types of trees to make sure that we're understanding how big they get and how the canopies grow and spread and all that. But even the fence, like the example of the change of the fence from the PVC to the wrought iron, that was intended to be more of a, this is gonna look better ultimately. I mean, we had a white PVC fence cutting all the way up to the property, all the way to the main road. And it's really not necessary because you have a commercial use, which is the dealership adjacent to another commercial use. So you don't need that thick 100% white solid fencing.
Correct.
So it was really that modification was simply an upgrade as far as we were looking at it.
Do you have the aluminum fencing going, does it end where the showroom ends?
No, so it goes back
Looks
to,
like it goes further.
yeah, we're finishing it at the edge of where the commercial property stops on this side. So there's a line right in here, and that's the point right there. So the fence goes from 3 feet, and then it transitions up to the 6-foot high fence, so that it ties together with the taller white fence.
So, and I wasn't sure if I got the line properly, I guess, in relation to your building, where do you think the fence?
It's relatively back in here. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't go the full length of the building, and it does not stop up by where the showroom is. It's 3/4 the way into the building elevation.
So, and we could go into the site, pull out the landscape plan and figure out where it's closer. I wasn't sure where these lines, if these are the right lines, but it was PVC here, right there.
It's rough.
Probably close to
It's
that.
pretty
isn't it?
close, yeah. Because the back of our building's pretty close to staying within the commercial piece of the front of both the property in Henrico as well as our property here. So,
So we could hold under either.
While we're on this one, probably the other, the main PDF, it shows a little bit more context. The landscape plans.
It's weird how it just disappears off there, isn't it? But seeing now there's a plan for these up.
So where's the landscape plan? It's probably on the So yeah, you can see right here's there where that transition occurs, from the fence type. What we did, and again, just on the landscape, you can start to see all of these locations right here. These are all those existing willow oaks that are on the other property, big trees, eventually it's gonna be very large. And there's a lot of them that are planted, so we strategically targeted this zone here, somewhere in the middle, and this guy to help frame the view as you're looking from, we're thinking a lot about what this neighborhood is potentially gonna see. What we also did was we enlarged these islands. These islands originally were a little bit smaller. That was one of the comments we got from staff, was make these a little bit bigger so that there's a better chance that the trees are going to survive, you know, the heat island, the parking lots get real hot. So these were increased in size from at least along the design process. And yeah, the rest of the perimeter and all the zoning requirements for amount of parking and islands, we've checked all those boxes to make sure we have the correct and adequate amount of interior landscaping for the project. But that really has become the primary focus for, I think, what we're looking at today is this entire length has been just really a lot of effort has gone into it. And I think, Ray, if you can scroll back down to the existing photos of what we're talking about next door. So, that one. So for example, you can kind of see it here, right in here. So this tree line, right here, this is our property right here relative to the parking up here. And those big trees I was talking about are actually like right here. Those are just two big guys. So those were the two ones that we were trying to keep, but just didn't really work out. This area back here that does drop down is deeper into the property. So we could look at, you can see where this island is right here relative to the location of where our property would be, but there is an existing small retaining wall that's down there.
That's what I remarked when I went out there yesterday, was where that road was across between the townhouses and that little island point too. I saw the retaining wall, and it's a pretty substantial retaining wall.
Right.
And I didn't get out the measuring tape or anything, but it looked like at that point, it was probably a 10-foot drop off.
So, Ray, can we go back to the site plan? So that's occurring. That drop off is occurring. That island that we were just looking
Yeah,
at.
that's kind of,
And then
here.
and to the left of that is where I
Drop off's back by the wetland.
and then it gets a lot, even much, as you go further back, it really gets steeper.
Correct.
Right.
And that's an area we're not developing.
Right, but that point of where that island is, that was where I thought the retaining wall was in general.
Yeah.
And I saw that, that's why I was curious with the 6-foot fence, it wouldn't even cover the cement retaining wall that's in there. It wouldn't even reach that height almost.
Can you go to the grade plan?
Probably doesn't have that in this set.
But, I mean, you can explain it, Dave, where we're tying back basically to existing grade
Yeah.
at our property line from behind the building all the way to the end of our parking. We've eliminated our retaining wall on our side to where we're tying back basically the entire back half of our
What
property.
is that, what does tying back
It
mean?
means
Infill?
we're infilling.
No, we're infilling to,
We're
yeah,
You got level.
and regrading it out and grading it down from east to west.
Okay. They're gonna take that 10-foot drop off out of the picture.
exactly.
I think it's good. So, I guess the question, I think originally is this area here, because it's higher to get the cut in, you're actually coming down through here, so that's part of it. You'll have your wall there, and on this backside, we're raising up to be, that's why it's originally. The other, that, I think it's a great view where you see this. That's pretty close to what it say. It's an up and down.
It's an up and down.
You're gonna have to bring this area up this side.
Yeah, we come up into the site, into the building, and then we gradually go back down to drain our storage back to the southwest corner.
So you're no longer putting a retaining wall in?
No, we are.
Oh, okay.
It just doesn't have to go the full length anymore.
The retaining wall's going from about here to
Basically where the
roughly here,
Oh, okay.
roughly.
So is that aluminum fence gonna sit on top of a retaining wall?
Right behind it.
Can you talk about the Enrico site next to it? So what is, no, that one right there, so the empty lot, that's most likely gonna.
There's nothing on that front part right now, and as far as I don't know if anything's going to be built there, but on the other side of that driveway in is where the two commercial buildings are.
Right, I looked at it yesterday, it's just, you could definitely put something on that site, I mean, that's a commercial site, you can get something on there. I imagine, I don't know what's.
I've had
What do you think's
conversations
gonna go
with
on there, Jen?
I don't think anything was set in stone, but I do think there's like some sort of office building
Yeah.
or anything.
The other two parcels are all medical.
So-
That was part of the
People
discussion.
medical and animal
Animal
medical, and now what's the other one?
But there, it is
Vegetable
a
and
dog.
medical.
All right, that was my takeaway, so it's actually fairly level at that point into the dealership. Why isn't there any landscaping along that fence, the aluminum fence?
Yeah, the part of the original approval, we did have a condition that if there was room, if you recall from what PDC was, that if there was room, then we would expect some landscaping of some sort. I don't know what's changed, how much room we
It's
have.
not, the
Because
room
previously we
isn't
had
changed.
like maybe 5 feet
Very
of
minimal.
separation,
Very minimal.
and it wasn't much that we could put there. Before that from a.
I think with
that.
5 feet, you could put something, I mean, it just seems like.
Yeah, I mean,
it
that's,
just looks- it just
I
looks
actually
kind of-
recall.
Are we? Do you remember the number?
I mean, it's 5 feet between the property line and the top of the wall with the fence in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So we can't put a tree, we could
No,
put
no, just
some
something like,
shrubs.
just shrubs like you have in the
Shrubs.
front, something like low-lying shrubs, or something that would, it just seems like it's a missing element.
Yeah, I guess something that's a little bit of softening, would be more decorative type stuff.
I guess we could see what Henrico is gonna
And what they have.
anticipate,
If they're
right?
planning to put anything.
And I can't imagine it will be anything, because if they develop to the property line, they're not gonna be able to keep any trees. And I don't think they're gonna require anything between a commercial and a commercial use, from a landscaping aspect. As far as their newest transitional buffers requirements go.
I mean, really the point of that fence was,
I'm sorry, but I couldn't quite hear you.
oh,
I was just trying to let you know.
the point of the fence, and the change of it, we need it because of the retaining wall component that we have. So there is a small change in grade. And so as far as a buffer is concerned, like we're talking about, I think that the primary purpose of this was to make this a more attractive fence coming all the way down to the main road as
Well, it
opposed to
gives
the 6 foot.
visibility to this building as they're coming down Broad Street from the east as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's an advantage, that, oh yeah, there's the Honda dealer.
Sure.
From that perspective. I'm just wondering about, could the transition be pulled forward so that there's not as much of the industrial part of the building showing. Along with possibility of some screening.
You're saying take this and pull this
Yeah.
closer in. I'm sure we could figure something. I think the idea with it was to try to make this feel more unified, right? Like this is this is one piece of both of these. So once the commercial component adds in there, you're trying not, it felt strange because we've looked at this for a
Well,
very
it's
long
actually, I
time.
mean, it looks like the transition is back
It's
where
pushed back.
well, it's back where there's parking for the homes.
Correct.
As opposed to at the front, like if it were in line with that, where the drive comes in there, like there, yeah. That might make a
We
little
could pull
bit
that
more
over.
sense to really clarify. Back here, it's residential, it's weird residential, but it's residential. Out front, I shouldn't say that, but it's business up front.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think,
Huge front.
yeah, if that's a concern, that's something we could look at and get to, when we have the plans that are gonna recline up with
Right,
those drives
yeah.
and start the transition.
We can
at
transition
different
that, we
locations.
can, if we can work with you with that, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And same thing if you're concerned about, landscaping, that's something we talked about all along, to really see what's there. I would advise that, like we mentioned, it's probably nothing but from shrubs would be the only thing that would be
Because
there.
you're not gonna be able to get a tree to survive
yeah,
up there, but
correct.
something to soften it would be nice.
And if you don't mind, we'd say that, and then we coordinate, I guess, and they already have something sort of in the works that we could work out.
On their building, may preclude from seeing it anyway. So
Yeah,
depending on their setback and where their building's gonna sit.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's a good point. When the building goes there, on the front, and it will, coming westbound on Broad Street, you're not gonna be able to see anything, because it's, the two buildings are gonna be pretty close.
it's pretty close to each other, yeah.
But you're gonna see things that you pull into the dealership, and you're gonna see things that come, heading east, because you have a nice landscape, as you can see in the frontage, and, so just having that fence by itself, regardless of what happens with the Rico, I think they just have some small shrubs that just, tie into the fence a little bit, like, would just be a simple thing to do, that would make it, with your goal, you want it to enhance the look. It just enhances the look in a very easy, cost-efficient way, and it's not, I can't imagine
It's,
shrubs we got material in terms of cost.
yeah, so again, this is an area that's kind of like, I guess the fence is probably stopping about here.
Right.
Where your original landscaping is, so this, I'm not sure if this is the full layout, I mean, I could, I can see where we were on landscape plans, but
That was,
that's as
that
close
hasn't changed.
to the tree and stuff here. You can't really pick out, there's a huge amount of shrubs that go along this line, they don't jump out of here, so.
You do something complimentary,
So
whatever
it's
those
all
small
complimentary,
shrubs
so
are.
right there, yeah, and again, we talked about from the very beginning, if there was room, we were gonna get some sort of landscape in there that trees wouldn't be there. Those probably, it almost better to soften the PVC fence before, but in this situation, if we would probably working into the element to see how it works, if that's something you're concerned about for that. Keep in mind, coming this way, the wall, I guess, the wall's stopping around here where it really starts to level out.
Correct. Somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, cause it's right at,
Because then it starts to drop.
yeah, there's your turn, so this is where the wall starts to grow, the property starts to drop.
Correct.
Can I just clarify something for the record? I mentioned the medical office, I'm not 100% sure that that's true on that spot right there. I have a informational only POD that was sent to me, and it shows like a parking area in that site, so I don't take that word for, it could be developable, but don't.
Whatever we're talking about, I think we don't worry about what Henrico's gonna do or
Right,
not.
I just wanted to,
No,
I agree, but I said something, I wanted to take it back.
Well, the veterinary hospital would be very happy if they put parking.
Yeah.
I know people who work there. They're worried
Uh,
about parking.
Yeah, and so we're not really sure what that element is and how it would relate to what they're doing. This one kind of shows it on this part.
But again, I don't know if anything has changed on this.
I don't know in terms of topics, but, this is also relevant to this letter that we received. And when is this discussion about this coming to the agenda?
Again, this was a comment that's received, it really related specifically to the views in there, so it is part of your consideration, just like we had someone before you making a comment.
Did you see this letter from Henrico?
They've sent a letter in pretty much before every meeting.
So what's your take on their recommendation?
Well, again, I mean, I think, I tried to address this before, but if you look at Henrico's developments down Broad Street, you go east to west, and you go West Broad Village, you go Green Gate, you go to the site that we're talking about. They have parking right on top of the homes. There's very little buffer. And I think one of the things that Dave tried to do here was to show, the way they've oriented this. This team has put a lot of effort into the views from Henrico. I'm not sure Henrico put a ton of effort into the views from Gucci when you look across the line the other way. So I think that, I do a lot of work in Henrico. We read that letter. We feel like we've done a lot to address the view shed from that side.
When we got this letter, I was kind of laughing because I was looking at, asking the same question about on the side there where there's that row of parking with trees and small things. Maybe it would be a better buffer to have that whole row be trees, as he's suggesting here, or trees or something that's gonna provide more of a buffer and maybe also give the trees a better chance of survival because they're not, and small islands. Because the trees that they have, they're pretty small right now on the Henrico side, and when they get big, they're not gonna be screening down low. They might be screening up high, which will benefit the parking area, like if you're far away looking at it, but up close, it's not going to do much screening. Whereas trees along this row, instead of, I think it's 20 spots there, would do a lot more, and then you could possibly do away with those islands at the end, add a couple spots there, so you're not losing that many spots, but you're gaining a lot of screening.
So, but I think my point, we discussed this with staff, a couple times, you know, we pulled up Google Earth, and I think Green Gate's probably the best example.
Yeah, that's a completely different situation.
Well,
And they have extensive landscape,
you've got 4-story townhomes
but it's extensive
That-
landscape,
that
not even
come
close
out-
to what you're proposing in Green Gate.
that, that come out onto massive seas of parking. So I'm just gonna be candid, I don't understand some of the comments here. I think that this is a commercial corridor. This has been zoned for commercial use for a long, long time. So Henrico has known this entire property is zoned for commercial. They had previous commercial properties that were approved on this that didn't go forward. I think that a ton of thought and meetings and public input and staff input has sort of gone into this. I think that the views and when you look at the way these buildings are oriented, the townhomes in the front, there's 2 end units that have windows looking towards this property. You have to move farther back to get one row of homes that sort of has a view on the parking area. So this is not sort of something that impacts that entire development. You're talking about a small row of townhomes there. And I think that we put just a lot of effort and a lot of thought into screening this in the best possible way.
And Joanne, Jamie,
I won't be too insulted.
what is your response to this letter from the right road, from a planner perspective, development perspective, and also, regarding the overlays, and trying to do some things that you articulated as sound from the get-go with this out.
No, I was gonna say, I'm gonna you guys spend more time, we discussed it, but if you don't hit my points, I'll.
Okay, well, part of the original consideration is that we did go ahead, and administratively grant leave to recade for the buffer for this because of the site topography and design.
And the fact that it was already previously approved back in 2015,
So the
it was
original,
established as a commercial.
yeah,
district.
and it had the original road went along this essential here. So because that previous approval, which again, we could pull it up if we needed to show you, but basically the building sat pretty close to where it is, and it had like an entrance and sort of a road that went right along the boundary. So, that, of course, I believe predated the overlay. So what we did is through the site type of thing, we did through the actions that the committee, because it was the topic of conversation previously, is how do we minimize the impacts of the views to the extent possible, not just for consideration of that impact on that, but also what we felt was appropriate impact of a viewshed for another property within Houston County or Henrico County. And so part of that was kind of this layout and not having a buffer and I was sort of, let's say, baked in the sauce when we were going through the zoning review and the site layout that the board approved. So things after that were really, how do we do the minimization of views, soften the appearance? How do we make the aesthetics of this property be something that we would be an expectation for Houston and would be good neighbors? I think, and to certain extents, that the applicant has tried to address those concerns. I don't think they've been I think what the problem is their very limitations about where that road basically was approved before is so close to the property, and by the topographical concerns for the design itself, there's just not a lot of room left in their site and sort of the constraints for them to kind of address the other landscape issues that would, I don't disagree, maybe enhance it, or protection, but the Henrico side, as you see in the pictures, that parking is pretty close on to what their minimum setback
Yeah,
is
the
there.
POD that I have does not have it. I do know, and again, as Ray said, you know, this predated, you know, the development in Henrico. So they built the residential knowing that it was a commercial site as well with the approved landscaping already being removed in the previous case. I'm gonna be honest with you, the part you were talking about up front was not a major part of our discussion. Our main discussion was trying to protect the viewshed of the residents. The height alone, I mean, you would have to basically build a wall of the height of the parking deck to basically screen it completely. So minimizing it was important. You know, in our discussions, because it wasn't just in letters, we've actually had discussions with some of the staff in Henrico County, and some of their suggestions were like even, you know, contact Stanley Martin and see if we can put some landscaping on their side. So they were like really understanding that, you know, we had very limited options on our site based on the site restrictions. So those were just some of the staff's take.
Is
For
that
what
right?
it's worth, they have, you know, when we were sitting there talking with them, the trees that were added actually are an improvement than what they originally thinking.
Mr. Costello, I assume you're aware that the fact that there would only be 5 feet before the start of actual development was discussed before the board and in fact as a condition of one of the zoning approvals.
And I guess, you know, part of my inquiry is, given you've held the dialogue with Henrico, they knew about this project before they put the, whatever this green day, whatever it's
I'm
called.
assuming they did their research.
But they continue as recently as July 15th, right? Monday, continuing to issue a letter with specific recommendations. I mean, they're very targeted. They want to consider increased buffer widths. They're actually looking for additional landscape across the property line. They're suggesting the removal of a row of, that would allow for an additional landscape buffer, closer to the residents. And also, I think the point that struck me is keeping in line with their buffer standards in their zoning ordinances. So, you know, those are things that I don't think Boucher wants to have lower development buffer standards than Henrico. You know, I think we want to at least have, I mean, particularly in the overlay district, we want to have higher standards in the overlay district, not lower standards. So those are the things that struck me, and I guess the timing of it as well. It's like, why is this continuing to be, you know, identified formally? And I just want to understand what this what's dynamic behind it.
And I don't know if JD can explain, because I certainly can't, but what's curious to me about it is, they're asking for a 20-foot landscape buffer to comply with their standards. The property in their county was not developed with that. So how is a 20-foot landscape standard, and you may not know this because it's their ordinance, but their standard when that's not what's on their property? They don't appear to have complied with that standard on the
Correct.
development that they did.
Well, I'm not thinking that's how I read that. I think that they're suggesting a 20-foot landscape buffer in the area of the site closest to the existing residents. And then they go on to say the distance would be more in keeping with buffer standards from Henrico County.
Right, and not keeping
Yeah.
their own.
Oh, they-
So it's, I don't know that
They
they're
might
saying
be
20
coming
foot's
up.
the buffer standards. I think they're just
And
trying
again,
to reinforce their point.
I'm not sure, I mean, I've been on site, and Henrico does have very robust landscaping requirements on the frontage of Broad Street. There's basically just street trees every 100 feet.
Oh, that's what I was making the point. I mean, if you look at Short Pump, the whole corridor of Short Pump, it is extremely landscaped. I mean, it is very, very densely, and that's growing, it's gonna continue to look more park-like. And then I think when you get to this point, we don't want to have it look like it's the traditional, further east
Well, I
on
don't-
Broad Street,
yeah, I
that
don't
was built
think-
back in the seventies and eighties.
And I don't think we have, I mean, if you look at the landscaping along the frontage of Broad Street, I mean, we have killed it on the front.
Yeah.
As far as.
And I'm
plantings
not
and
suggesting
trees and
otherwise, I'm
walls.
just suggesting that
Yeah,
if you think
exactly.
about tying this together or something.
We've, through the original approval and discussions for, as a landscape process, we not only, we required additional upper growing shrubs, we've also put in a level at which we wanna talk about maintaining those shrubs long-term, and that's all part of the design that we sort of work through the design. So we will have actually, pretty robust, plus a low wall through there, like the walls that we have elsewhere in the area, so this will be more in character with what I hope that we continue to develop in Goochman, and it also be equivalent to what there are parts of Shore Pond that have that.
Well, can we go back to the picture again, just because I think, it doesn't sound from the applicant or from the staff perspective that what Enrico was asking is consideration. We're thinking about it, there have been some steps that have been made, as just reviewed recently, about what you've done with the 6-foot fence and these different trees, and I get your alignment, Dave, right? Yeah. I get what you're saying too, is if I'm in the townhouses and I look at these 4 or 5 trees you have, and then you have the parking kind of the islands with those trees, over time, you would eventually block some of that out, just the angles.
That's correct.
So I get that, there was some thought put into that. The only suggestion I would throw out, and maybe in the spirit of county cooperation, that, what you could go back to and say, hey, we made an effort, we obviously can't change this to the extent you want, but here's kind of what we've done, and be able to articulate it and show them. And what I would think in that regard is, I would start with that Broad Street corner, with that black wrought iron fence, it's a low fence, it's only 3 feet. And it said where you did some work on the front part of Broad Street with low shrubs, that probably aren't gonna grow them higher than 3 feet, right?
Well, I said, if there's room, then it would be likely it would be some sort of decorative type of fence that doesn't really provide screening. So we could, now that we know that this is gonna be a different type of layout, we could just.
Yeah, I would just try to do something, and then maybe to the extent that they have, I don't know how many trees that are specific in the landscape plan, but as you look at the landscape plan, I would try to make it a little more robust. Could be just something between the trees, if you've got, so it just looks a little bit nicer. I mean, there's a lot of money that's been saved by not having to build a parking lot. And I think that we do wanna have robust landscaping, not, I think it doesn't have to be to the extent you're talking about with stone walls and stuff on the front. But to have low-lying shrubs and done in a nice way would maybe help with the Henrico issue.
We want to be good neighbors.
Yeah, I want to be good neighbors, and I think, that's an easy way to do it, and it's a win-win. You have a more attractive property for not a high cost. And I just think it
I
just
agree with
get
what
us-
you're saying,
yeah.
and I understand it too. And so, here, whatever we can do to help, I'm glad to help. I will say first step is, not having a parking deck, I think was gonna be a lot better to them to look at, right now. Number 2, there's some more landscaping we need to do there. I'm happy to address it even after we've opened up too. You can make an adjustment after the building goes there or if a parking structure goes there. We can do that for sure. So we're gonna be the interest of Houston County, we wanna look good.
Well, thank you, and I think, I don't know how, Jim, I don't interact with these folks, but, you work with them, you're a cohort and stuff, so does that help? I mean, if you can go back with something that.
And if I could just sort of explain one more thing, because I think just to put it in context, because we talk a lot about this during the Zoom. This was when we first came in, when we first had this meeting, Joey was showing a lot of sites around, including other sites in Goochland, west of 288. And that was a hard no, right? The administration was very clear, we want development east of 288, especially things like this. So the Economic Development Group was really excited about the site. This was a really, really challenging site. I know Bill and Andrew especially will tell you, because of that huge sewer easement that runs through the property, We don't have the graphic up now, but it severely restricts where we can put buildings and where, you know, where we can't. And so the tightness of the site, you know, they were able to get rid of the parking deck, which I think was a huge win for so many people that didn't want to see it. But there's not a lot of wiggle room with what's left. And so that's why the request for an additional 20-foot buffer, while in a vacuum it seems like, hey, it's a small request, you're saving a lot of money by building, you know, by not building a parking deck. But we can't. We do that if we could. But these guys will tell you the site doesn't allow it. We're trying to do what we can. Jody is very clear and just reiterated he's going to do it, whatever more he can as far as putting additional plantings in. But you know, Mr. Casella, I just wanted you to understand sort of the context and all the background on the site itself, and sort of why we're pushing back so much on, you know, this eastern edge and what we can do, and you know, what we're willing to do may not be what we can do given the site constraints.
And given the requirements that we have in law,
Right.
Topography also played a role. I mean, even in the 5-foot setback of the slope, there was literally nothing they could plant that could live on there. And that would be some of my concerns at the front, but if it can be achieved, you know.
And especially then PVC with the PVC fence going all the way down there, you basically, things don't really grow very well. You gotta have different spacing for that. We also weren't really sure what type, until we really get into final PND approval, and we don't know what the remainder is, what do we really need for that construction of that. A little bit easier with the wrought iron, I mean, the aluminum fence looks like wrought iron. And where your transition of your retaining wall is not as tall and things like that. So, you know, what I could do is if you wanted to set, staff would explore additional landscaping, within your boundaries for that front of the area.
Can I ask just a dumb question at this point in the process? Why does it need to be a cement path between the building and the wrought iron fence? Isn't the main way to drive in and out of the back parking lot on the west side?
We
What's
have
that little road
to,
for?
we have to have a fire, we have to allow fire
Oh,
trucks
it's
to
a
go
fire, it's a
around.
fire lane.
It's a fire lane all the way around the building.
Fire-
It's
okay,
20
that's-
26-foot wide fire lane around the building.
That's helpful, I didn't understand what that was for.
No, it's all good.
And that's what, that was so
All good
much of
questions.
what
Our
forced the
discussion.
site. Because when we first looked at it, it's like, well, you know, previously that access was there, do we still really need it? Unfortunately, with this site and be able to be fire code and stuff, it really did have to be there.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, we've talked a lot about the eastern border. Is just the assumption that has been to date, the southern border backs up to undevelopable land?
Yeah, and part of that we could explain. So originally the parking deck came about right here at the end of this row right here, okay? And we can look at another thing. This area right here, it is an area that I think there's a trail that goes part of the Henrico side of it is, so it is like an environmental.
There's a
It's
wetlands
a
that
wetlands.
cuts the
Yeah.
back half of
Well, I
that
know they
property.
did the Gateway Square, they put in all kinds of trails. So
Yeah.
that, I guess that's what.
There's a-
So you can see the
Henrico
floodplain
has
here.
their,
There's a
they
defined
have the Tuckahoe
wetlands.
Creek boardwalk.
Yeah,
So I've been involved in that, and they have another client in another area, but they've got, along Tuckahoe Creek, they've got that boardwalk project going, and
right.
behind the site adjacent to us, basically behind our site and behind the pump house is part of that, yeah.
And I guess that lessens the need for really any type of buffers on the south and the western side, because there's already natural buffers on the
Yeah.
south, and you, because of the pump house and the floodplain, you have natural buffers.
Correct, and you get Tuckahoe Creek and
Right.
all of that
Yeah.
buffering there.
We had one there, it's, you can see how treated it is back there naturally, for the site, and the salt carrier, so we've got it covered up, but it's a pretty natural area. So that is, the way the property comes down in America does have a little bit of features that are back behind that they can use for rack.
Yeah, those lines that are covering up are actually wetland.
You can see their trails. And then, yeah, so the distinction is, again, I don't want to lose sight of, so the southern elevation has changed, as a result of that. The original layout, of course, the the whole parking deck came here. Now, of course, the building footprint is much shallower, for that. If you were concerned, or if that was, make sure we get this squared away, what you're approving. Original southern elevation, part of that was the parking deck and all the other features on top of it. But now rear proposed elevation, it does have the material variations, the color scheme and things, so it has the other elements that we look for. This, by approval of this elevation, the good portion of this, there's no penetrations on this side, east, and then the area where the penetrations are basically the areas that are where the retaining wall and stuff is on the eastern side, and then on the western side.
Yeah, we carry continuous similar elements on the east and west side along the back, as far as the reveals and the color scheme to make it all blend and together.
So, it's basically really to use the parapet and then the wall, and it would have the same materials like here.
Nobody back there to look at it particularly.
Yeah, there's,
And
you
since
know,
it's natural, trees will probably be.
yeah, there's a slight angle to, they're getting a side angle onto the rear, but it doesn't have any things that are the nuisance factor related to hair or anything like that.
And sorry, just remind me, a few instances, every case is considered a case-by-case basis. We don't set precedent with not having to require anything on the southern side, or are we going down a road here where the next request comes in and they said, well, look what the Honda dealership did, we had a whole bunch of exceptions, all kinds of leeway, we're looking for the same thing.
That is 100% a given for board decisions, which are truly the legislative action of a governing body.
Okay.
Okay. The DRC, I haven't ever reviewed to determine that you have that same legislative power. But you come back to what is a law, real estate law, which is every piece of real estate is different. And that's why, if you've ever been familiar, sometimes if somebody reaches a real estate agreement to you and says the seller goes, I'm not gonna sell it to you, the law would recognize your right to potentially force that seller to sell it to you, because that real estate is unique. Some other piece of real estate is not worth it. Now, that rarely happens, and thank goodness, but that is that overarching belief about real estate, that it is all different, all separate. And what you are looking at here, again, you've been asked to consider the topography, the size, and so forth of this piece of property. And so when you're looking at that, you'd say, well, when are we ever going to see a piece of property with this topography, with the wetlands, with the booster statement, with the easement? All of those things are what you're being asked to consider in deciding this. So yes, I would say to you that real estate is unique. This real estate in particular is showing you topography, size, and other configurations that cause it to need relief from the design review committee. So I just wanted to change it a hair's breadth from what the board says, because they have the full legislative powers.
So as we think about these these votes are, can we reflect in the vote that due to the unique topography, everything that Sarah just said, we're making these exceptions to the overlay standards, we're making these, giving us leeway to these things, so it's very specific to this. I think that would be helpful.
So I researched this quite a bit before we came in for our first meeting, right? And so in the county's ordinance, the design review committee, and Tara, to her credit, stated it without looking at it. I have to look at it. But it says, to allow flexibility in the application of the design and development standards applicable to overlay districts, the design review committee may grant reasonable deviations from the design standard if the site's topography, configuration, and other unique circumstances prevent full compliance with requirements. So that's really what we were, and that's under your powers and duties of the design review committee in section 15-4. So I would certainly agree with County Attorney that what you're doing today is unique to this property. And that's why I wanted to describe some of the background and the context of this particular site. And it's my opinion that if you did what Enrico was asking as far as you know, putting a 20-foot buffer in the site, the site would be undevelopable. At least, because it has so many challenges, there's a lot of cost that's going into the site work on this location. So only certain uses have the potential of recovering that capital investment. And so that's why, you know, I don't explain all that to sort of show how much Joey's spending on this, but it's to explain why we're in here asking for these things.
Mr. Casella, I'm not sure that the decisions of this body, which this is the one that from December's meeting that came out in January, reflect that standard in every, you know, approval. But that is why on your staff report, it's like the second paragraph. This is what you are deciding. So a decision that approves this is deciding it has met those standards. So, and I just, because again, I'm not entirely sure, but having reviewed what the approval says from the past, but understand this approval is subject to, you can only approve it if it meets those standards. But I don't want to speak for staff, because I just want to make it clear that that isn't necessarily every approval, but I think that is the standard for your decision.
I think it's helpful to reiterate, you know, that in the minutes of the whatever we, how it will be reflected. And I think too, going back to like the Henrico letter, you know, I do think administratively, you should be able to work with the landscape plan to come up with something that we're talking about. To just look at that fence being pushed back as suggested, you know, pushed further towards Broad Street, you know, figuring out some type of minimal, low, I don't say minimal, but kind of complementary low line
Something that will
buffers
survive.
that will survive. And I think the other thing too is, if you can go back to Henrico, kind of where we're going with this, is say, hey, we have a meeting, given the consideration, when we're doing these things, push them a little bit. Go back to Stanley Martin, because I walked that property yesterday, and between that, into that parking lot where the curb is, to the property line, there's a lot more than 5 feet, right? So they could do something on their end, or have Stanley Martin do something on their end to improve that, their property, that doesn't, it benefits Honda, but it's not at their cost. And it's kind of like, if, hey, we Goochland made the effort, you also try to make the effort, because it is the county line, and it's a mutual benefit to do such a thing. Because their trees, if you remove that current environmental wood line, the 2-3 trees that are there now, they're kind of dying, there's no irrigation there. As soon as that bulldozer comes through, as soon as you start moving dirt around, you're gonna get a lot of calls. We need to anticipate that and have communications ready so that we can respond pretty quickly back and say, hey, we made all these steps. In fact, we recommended that Henrico do this, this, and this to try to mitigate it.
And that was part of our discussion with Henrico as well, when they were saying, we had the developer work with Stanley Martin. They were saying they basically, their zoning has already been decided and implemented, so they don't have the tools to make them do it. But if they're getting complaints from their citizens or from the
Well, the
board member,
homeowners might.
yeah,
The homeowners,
perhaps,
the HOA
perhaps,
may decide, I don't know if it's between the
Yeah.
HOA, but they may decide to do their own, take their own initiative and do something that really is
It's just
probably
been
not.
turned over to the developer.
Right.
I guess, you know, the back part by the parking lot is, that's still a concern. And he's saying 20 feet maybe because he's looking at the size of the parking spaces or something. I'm not sure it's 20 feet, but maybe maybe some buffer could be along that back section to provide better screening of the parking lot than just the fence and a few trees that are showing up on the landscape plan would provide. To make an effort to be a good neighbor on that and give them a little bit more of a buffer, and make it more attractive so that your neighbors don't hate you. You want your next door neighbors to come and buy cars. So I think it would be minimal impact on the parking area to have some trees along that back area where they've got the 3 trees but extend the whole thing, you know. And maybe they could do away with those end islands and have more parking there because they have more screening and more ability for those trees to survive if they're in a bigger area that's not and it would be maybe shaded a little bit at the bottom by the fence, but, hopefully they can survive, but I think that that's worth looking at as something to make it a little bit more landscaped on that side.
Right, can we go back to the site plan? I'm trying to remember how big those three islands are on the edge.
Yeah.
They're like,
And then we
one
got
in the
four
corner,
islands.
so it's like 3 parking spaces.
These are 18 feet deep.
It's probably rounding to 20 feet.
So you have 35.
They're the size of the parking cell.
Right, yeah, so if it's 18 feet, it goes the length, and then you eliminate those other 4 things and have 2 more parking.
Is your
spaces
intention,
there.
is your intention to try to keep the existing vegetation?
No, well, I don't think there's going to be any existing vegetation once
Right,
you're
that-
building in there, but to add vegetation along from the back of the building where you have that first island against the wall, if you will, against the border, and have it go the whole length there instead of just having 3 little islands.
I think the one thing that I'm thinking of as we're talking about this is if we increase this thing we're talking about and push that edge of the parking further in, what we're also doing is taking those 4 large trees and those 4 islands and pushing those in also.
So what I'm thinking is maybe you don't need those.
That's what I'm wondering, can we
Yeah,
eliminate
because
this
if
we're
you
losing
had,
so much
if you had
parking?
screening the whole length on this side, it's a natural area, then you don't need those other ones. As a possibility, I don't, and I wouldn't leave it to staff to say, hey, you're crazy, but that could be something where you reclaim some spaces, but you've got a much more consistent buffer from the neighbors.
So you gotta
In
retain
one
that
line.
parking there, if we
Yes.
move that whole
Yeah.
line there, we retain that parking there, it's an even swap.
Yeah, I see, we still
Yeah.
need a minimum, or minimum 2.2 on the front.
I think we're talking preferences. I mean, as I've been looking at this particular thing, there's depth to it right now. So there's not all the trees are in a line like what we're talking about right now. There's almost like a boulevard.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna speak for staff, but, you know, a lot of times when we meet with you all, you wanna see islands breaking up the parking spaces,
Yeah,
right?
and that's what we were both discussing, that, you know, this could be a consideration, but we can't commit to that right now because we'd have to make sure that that wasn't part of the parking requirements that are the
Yeah,
underlying.
that's part, it is, the
requirements.
island's part of that, but we're sort of being flexible to try to accommodate this portion here, so we can get the trees up against the, border as we could. And I think part of that, as the consideration is that, yeah, it'd be nice is, I think is when you think about the angles of view in here, I think David could actually help me see a little bit better too, explaining how the depth adds to that, because these trees with their height and the sight lines that these people will even have from a height, actually, it's almost better to have a variety of different levels. Because, yeah, originally, we were concerned, we were thinking the same way. And if the way that they've consciously lined that up, and we'll look at that through the POD and landscape process, is to try to match up with what the trees are on the other side as well. There's no way about this site in this building, short of we already had an existing stand of trees that it was already left on the other side. Could we really screen it? I guess for our standpoint, is we get a little concerned when we really want to have controls at the end of these intersections, that, you know, that we have a requirement already for number of spaces, you gotta put comments. I think for this site with this much vehicular traffic and things like that, we'd also like to sort of keep those controls at the end.
You know when you're in an aisle, you know where the aisle is.
Yeah, and you know, we already have an interior landscaping requirement. For this is also consistent with every other, parking area that we see in the county, because we did have a discussion with them originally. They were saying, hey, we just get rid of those islands and just have this,
You did
and
have
stuff
some-
that's inconsistent with how we treated the Audi, if you look at their site and others. So it would be, loath to say, I mean, there's ways we could look into it, you know, if you know, they'd have to assess really what that does to further activity.
And to your point, we've already created that, it just, those 4 islands are inland instead of up against the property, so we're still creating that you just said, shading from view.
Yeah, sure, because again, once we got rid of the buffer requirement, but for this, we're kind of limited in what we can do to screen that. And, you know, if they're willing to lose more spaces or whatever, I worry about really to be honest, because that is a greenhouse condition for those lines.
20, 30 feet, 40, 50 feet. Yeah, so those four will go 40 to 50 feet. And the parachute ones are
35
30,
to 45
45.
So
Yeah.
it's a well thought out, staggering as far as height goes and distance goes, like Dave was talking about. We looked at sight lines very specifically from those townhouses and the angles into the back of the building.
You talking as far as the type of trees?
And the
And the
trees
location.
and the locations.
And the location of it.
So you have, your professional landscape architects know what kind of trees to put on, you're not relying on staff to say, put these trees. And you're okay, you have somebody on staff that says those are good trees.
Yeah, that's what we'll do, you know, and in fact, if that's something I wanted to add and say, you know, as part of the plan, the landscape plan, appropriate trees and spacing to, because I didn't bring the landscape plan forward to you, because again, we want to evaluate you're okay with the concept, we'll figure out exact tree species and the like, what's appropriate. We haven't offered approval to what they submitted so far. We want to make sure that it's there, and we can always do the species to see what's appropriate. We want something that has height and canopy. So these will be large deciduous, and we'll work to see what's appropriate with that, and part of that, we could also demonstrate the views and things like that for staff that we need to convey the concept that you're trying to put forward.
One of the things is just from memory from that last meeting, I'm curious how you are thinking about it. One of the benefits about having the parking garage was to emphasize security. I just recall that from somebody's presentation. How do you consider the open parking deck from a security perspective? I'm just curious. I mean, do you have cameras? I mean, how do you protect your inventory?
Yeah, you know, so, how do we protect our inventory with it being open rather than being in a parking deck? Yeah, definitely cameras, right? Limited access to the back end of your parking lot. You know, because it's easy access coming in and out, you know, that attracts thieves for sure. But you know, for us with Hondas, we don't tend to have theft compared to our GM vehicles and so forth, because the parts resale is not the same, right? You know, Chevy trucks, that kind of stuff is, our Chevy dealership, we had a lot of problems.
Because the other consideration, you know, I was there yesterday, just as an observation. I drove around the Stanley Martin thing. There were a bunch of kids, little kids. They weren't teenagers. They were young kids, 8, 10, 5, all riding their bikes. There's a whole crew of them. So little kids being adventurous, just think, hey, let's go to the new Honda dealership and check out the cars, you know, on their bikes. I could just envision that, so I didn't know.
I knew what you were doing.
I think
You
the
were
new
doing.
fence and stuff, you know, I think will help.
And as we talked,
Thank you for that thought, thank you. I mean, I didn't think of it that way, but yes. I get
Yeah, it struck me because it was something that you haven't seen in a while, just like little groups of kids riding their bikes. There's no parents supervision, it was just a free-for-all. It reminded me back when I was a kid, back in the 70s.
Hopefully they live in those.
Well, I'm sure they did, I'm sure they did.
There's drop
Which
off.
means really there are adult eyes in at least a third of the homes looking out potentially. I would
They should be
think.
watching their kids, not the Honda side.
But I think the fence, I think some of the things, and you mentioned the parking deck, I mean, there's a lot of positives that, I think you'll.
and our lighting didn't change either. It's still secure lighting, but it only lights up and enter if someone comes into the space, otherwise it's dim.
And it's all like, I guess that's dark sky compliant and all that.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, we're assuming that we're pretty much seeing fixtures there.
Correct.
We had in that area for that, and I think in one of those plans you can see, we still talked about sort of the staggered height.
That's correct.
So pulls away from the Enrico side, so it's not quite as.
And our photo measures show that,
Right.
so no light
So it's hard to zoom in here, so.
exfiltration across the parking lot.
But those are all separate plans, Ray. At the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned that the lighting, the landscaping, and some of the other things were not discuss, we don't need to discuss that at the DRC tonight.
Yeah,
Do they
so,
come back to the DRC at some point?
no, those are administratively approvable. You know, there was specific concern with the original parking garage because of the height, so we shared those during that with direction to modify those. I anticipate with now a standard parking lot area, that it would be our typical review for, a lighting plan to conform the overlay and standards. And also just in conversation with them, the spirit of the previous approvals intended to be carried forward. It just didn't seem appropriate to bring that to the committee, since that's typically administrative approval.
Think for the landscaping. That's in the front of small shrubs, you just want that it's for working within Rico on.
I think so, I think, you know, for what do you, how do we,
You don't have any proposed motions, right?
well, we're just thinking about proposal, right? So I think what
Trying to get there.
is one, maybe kind of what we started out a few minutes ago, is because of the uniqueness of the property and all the things we discussed, you know, we feel we can continue to provide some leeway. Regarding the fence specifically, I'm okay with the 6-foot fence. I think we should extend it as you identified beyond the,
Yeah, and
um,
what about, I mean, the fence in the front is the black aluminum, the PVC fence is white.
White PVC, right? That's the color, I guess, is proposed, right? That's white.
Yeah, we didn't change it from the last time. That was
The New Yorker in me is going, oh, graffiti.
Well, and I guess again, that's something that can be a little confusing just because there are certain elements that they already had the approval for, and although Ray wanted to explain those to you,
Yeah.
really what they're asking for is approval of the deviation being shown here. Principally, which is the black parking deck, but you don't really have to go through each element.
Right.
Yeah.
but in terms of the specific fence, I think that the specific change was it used to extend all the way out.
Right.
Now, the request is to shorten it, which I'm okay with. And I think your suggestion would be to
Just-
not shorten it to the point where it's
Right.
shown, just
Exactly.
come out another, I don't know what that is,
Along with
20
the-
feet, 15 feet, whatever, aligned.
So,
Align with that curve of the
commercial-
roadway that we were
Yes.
talking about.
Right, so it's clearly delineating the
Mhm.
commercial from the
Right.
residential.
And I think the aluminum fence, so like a 3 or 4 foot fence.
Yeah, it's gonna match what's around the pump house.
But that's a high fence around the pump house,
Yeah,
right?
it
Right.
just
Yeah,
in
that's
style
different.
and look and
Style,
color.
Yeah, so it's my understanding we're gonna stagger down from the 6 down to probably eventually carries it forward as 3 to get down the side, for that. And that would go to really, transition where the retaining wall itself and elevation stops.
So I'm okay with that, are you okay with that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
But I think what we're suggesting, we want to have some type of buffer landscaping, small shrubs, I guess is the way. And since you had identified already the front part, where you have a lot of small shrubs on the front, something like those, just have them continue down the side in front of the
Float
fence.
around.
Yeah, real simple, and let them, they're not gonna grow much higher than the fence, and they would just complement it, so it wouldn't just end with those 3, they would just continue to go right down.
so they wouldn't have to go as far as they would have worked with this if they pulled the PVC fence closer.
Right.
With less distance to cover with the front.
And the only thing we talked about, and just to review it again, when you looked at those, there's only, I don't know how many trees, there's, what, 6 or 8 trees behind the PVC fence? So is there anything that could be done to put some type of smaller shrubs or something? I think Joey said he'd be willing to do something there to just enhance the cosmetics of it. And again, the spirit behind that would be, one, it just enhances the look, but also to go back to Henrico to say, hey, we're not doing what you are requesting, we've talked about it, but we do think we can you know, we've made some enhancements to just a general strip of mulch or whatever it is, so it looks a little bit more landscaped.
Trying to think.
Between those,
On the
on,
Henrico side or on?
well, the fences, isn't that still,
No,
isn't there?
I think, isn't the fence right on the property line?
I'm not sure if we have room on that
I'm
side.
not sure there's room there.
It's right on the property.
It's
On
right.
Oh, okay, all right,
It's
that's,
right
I
on
thought,
only a couple feet.
Yeah,
oh,
no,
so
it's
so
on,
that green spot's not part of the property.
no,
That's
no, that's
the
Henrico,
Henrico,
that's
standing
Henrico.
large
I don't think
green spot
Henrico
there.
I
wants us digging
misunderstood.
on their land.
It's okay.
Back
Yeah.
that often,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, it would be nice, but I think Henrico would have to do it, or the developer or the HOA. Okay,
Right,
so
okay.
we got a direction on that, and then on the back.
Back to building, yeah, you're okay with that?
Yeah, right.
I am too. I think we want to take advantage of the natural limits.
Yes, yeah. And then, and also because it doesn't go as far back as it did, yeah, this last building can look over there, but there should be trees there because it's still natural, so it's not gonna be terrible. Plus, there's going to be some trees all.
We have some back in the backside too.
Yeah, not a
right?
lot, but some.
Yep.
And actually, the trees that you've got on the ends of the rows would help that last building a little bit too.
Mhm.
Okay.
So those would be the kind of the main ones of what we're proposing to vote on. And then I think everything else we're suggesting to continue to administratively go back with staff on the details of the plans, and, you know, they have the ability and the authority already to move that forward, I guess.
Alright, so just so that we're clear, what you're proposing is that this 6-foot fence gets extended and where possible, from the front back to, the transition, as many smaller shrubs that would fit in the, on the
Right.
site.
That's right. It could be just one row of the same type of shrubs, it doesn't have to be anything.
Different necessarily.
Dramatic.
Something
It's
that
There's
should
not a lot
some
of
sort of
front
difference
one.
stagger them, I
Yeah.
don't think, so.
Okay, so the small trees if possible part comes out, I'm trying to figure out where that would go, okay. So that is what the proposal is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Ray, is there anything outstanding?
Propose that they work with staff on
Yeah, no, I think
pulling the
it's-
fence
yeah,
up
yeah,
and doing some landscaping along the aluminum part of the fence.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any, maybe we have comments, so are there any comments on the southern elevation?
So we're about to get to
Okay.
Thank you.
Does that give you a meaning in that topic?
It does, it does for me, are you good? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And all of these have your proviso, right, that they don't do the
Yeah.
precedent?
Yeah, I have that language.
That doesn't get put into motion.
I put it on, I got it. All right, and then.
He started with due to the uniqueness of the site.
Right, yes, okay. And as far as the south elevation goes, we would propose that that be accepted because it fits with the rest of the design and the elements of the building. So it's not detracting from anything.
Is there any recommendations that staff has specifically that you?
no, actually, basically what you're doing is you're replacing the previous elevation that was approved with this new one because all the other elements, that huge, it basically needs to become the new approved elevations for the property. It has, everything's the same, we did a course code to it, except for
From the
Part
southern
of
side,
it's gone.
yeah, from the southern side.
Right.
But
Southern
most of
side
the-
elevation
most
is
of what
different.
they had, previously had approved by the committee was on the eastern side.
Right, yeah.
So basically, it went from these as your approved elevations to now these.
Yeah, there's one more question. On the pictures, the garage doors on the new pictures, maybe on the screen it looks different, but in the pictures that I was looking at, the printout, they didn't look the same, but are they the same?
They haven't changed.
Okay,
from what they were before.
Like the service entry doors?
Yeah, they've not, they haven't
Okay,
changed.
okay,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell from the printouts.
Yeah.
Sure, no,
The
understood.
locations look the same, I think,
Right, yeah.
the texturing or whatever you used different was a
Yeah.
little bit different this time.
Oh,
so it probably
could be.
looked like
Yeah, I
they're
just
different.
Yeah, they kind
I
of
just
sound like the
wanted-
blue stripes or something, is that what you're, like this,
Yeah,
yeah, that kind of.
Yeah, no, it's fine, that's just shading.
Yeah, right, it's just in the presentation, they look different from the ones before, but that's fine.
Yeah.
It's the same.
So same configuration. And of course, the one that has the full detailed plan shows that here is southern elevation, which is different from the previous group. So again, it's just replaces these now become the new elevations.
Right.
Beautiful.
That was the simplest part, I think.
Oh,
It was really
absolutely.
the elevation.
Definitely.
Is there,
So
is
those
that
are the only elements.
what you want?
I'm just gonna go back when you said at the beginning, the requests around architecture, building materials, roof treatment, parking site layout, were those the four?
Right, those were, so basically you had 4 considerations, 3 of which are all combined together.
Okay.
Which is the ones related to, character and which is all related to the elevations. So the elevations, the only really change from that is, since there's no proposed material changes or general configuration, other than the removal of the park and the deck and the new southern, and say you've addressed all those first 4 elements, well, 3 elements of the sign. So really then came down to this, the parking and transition. Part of that was because a lot of the consideration with the original approval was based on the parking deck providing certain blocking and things like that. So I felt like you addressed all the elements that were necessary.
And are they in line with kind of staff's perspective, and you've done a lot of work on this, and is there?
Yeah, since for this, staff would consider the changed elevations consistent with what was approved before. A lot of discussion was about color scheme and materials. They satisfied that. The only thing that really,
That's right.
once you chop off the building is what's the back of the building looks like. It's consistent in materials and we didn't change things.
It just for, I wasn't involved in this first one, this staff house, but you mentioned about a lot of things that you've done and concessions. I think also it's important to know how much leeway staff has provided. And so I'm just coming in at this late stage. It seems like there was a lot of give and take and from both parties, but from staff working with such a unique site and trying to figure something out, and I think we need to make exceptions from time to time, and this is the gateway, and it is an important visual. And I do think, the corridor of Broad Street has changed, I think it continues to change, and what was the case, I'm not sure that will continue to be the case in terms of how it looks. And Ryko has done a good job with their short pump and landscape and buffers, and we don't want to have lower development standards than Ryko. So we appreciate you coming in and working with us on all this, and I know you're making a big investment, and yeah, that's great.
So we're excited to be part of the community, we're excited to be here. I'm really excited to get started soon. It's been a long process, but a good process too.
Yeah. Thank you, Renee, for all. It's been great working with the staff the whole way through. I think it's been a good spirit of cooperation amongst all of us. From 2 years ago that we started this, 2 years ago in September.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree.
It's good to
It's
hear.
been good to work
But,
together.
yeah, and part removing the parking deck, part of that concern was all of us. Especially their side, staff, and the committee put a lot of work into that. It's good from the business perspective, being able to do that and, for the property. But that was an element that we all, as a team, the committee, spent a year, staff and team, and Joey working with us to get it going. That was, and so that's why I was excited to come back again today, but they have been very responsive, and I think it's end result through the committee's action. We have a good entry user and building producer.
Great.
We're not trying not to mess it up.
So do we need to do anything with a formal vote? Is there
Yes.
something you can relay back to us that we can say?
But
Okay,
I
you wanna
don't,
take?
you're the chair, so you can't make a motion, correct?
The chair is entitled to make a motion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's about small body
Okay.
motion. Okay, that's what-
Okay, well, you just make sure, you guys make sure I get it right. Okay, so the easy motion is,
Well, I think the way the minutes go, you want one motion. Yes. So please make a motion that encompasses everything.
oh, okay, okay. Okay, then the motion will be that, the applicant work with staff on adjusting the fence layout.
Moving separate and
Yes.
it might be simplest.
Okay,
If you start with the motion is to approve what's before the design review committee with the following comments or conditions.
okay,
I think that might work out
okay,
best.
alright. I've still gotta say what we're approving.
But you can just say, you're approving everything you've seen tonight with the provision that,
You're approving,
Okay, okay,
approving as presented with, and then you make
okay,
the rest of it.
alright, so our motion then is to approve the application as presented, with this, then the applicant working with staff on adjusting where the fence transition is and the landscape. Anything else you need?
we could add this transition to align with the commercial
Yeah, okay. do it.
drive.
Commercial drive,
Commercial
the
drive.
commercial
Yeah,
East West
obviously,
Drive there,
right.
whatever.
That's good.
That would
Good
at
point.
least
Then
lots
we
of
know
know
where
what
to
we're
put
looking
it.
We know what we're talking about.
And the landscaping in front of the aluminum fence on the side.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good, thank you very much.
Ms. Parker, is there any old business?
We have no other business and no old business.
All right, well, seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, you got no business to stay.
Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thanks for helping me get that insight. You know,
Joey?
stagger that. Scratching my head a little bit yesterday. Yeah, just to see how it would work, and I couldn't quite figure